3.
There's a consent button now. All right, sounds good. Thanks for having me on to talk about the subseasonal challenges. It's always fun. Now, today's 16 to 20 day is September 1 through 5, so we're moving on into meteorological autumn. It's hard to believe, but making that gradual transition there. I just put together a few slides just to talk through some of our thinking and what my thinking was when I put my forecast together earlier today as well. These are the dynamic models right here. On the left is the CFS weeklies, the GFS ensemble weeklies, and also the ECMWF weeklies from last evening. And it's really interesting. In a lot of ways, they show flavors that we've seen persistently this summer. We've had a lot of struggles to get heat into Texas, so these two are still a little bit soft there. We've seen more heat in the upper west to the north central U.S. more often than not, and that's been common as well. I think last time I had a discussion with all of you, I was asking Dave about whether you guys were using the GFS ensemble weeklies as much in your system there, and it wasn't pulling it in. I've been very unimpressed with this model this summer. It has not done very well. It does well with hot patterns. It never catches the cool patterns. It's just hot all the time, and it's right there in the middle of the country all the time too. It's got a strong soil moisture feedback component to it. It only recently started cooling off the southwest as it responded to the excessive monsoon of the past month. It's not been very skillful. If you look at the overall June 1st through August 16th temperature departure map for the U.S., that is what I would call the summer base state. And it looks pretty close to what the CFS 16 to 20 is showing for the first 5 days of September. So it's pretty much in line with that. If you look at just from July 1st to August 16th, I would say this one might be a little bit closer to the European weeklies, which was a little bit cooler in the Midwest and up into the Northeast and East Coast areas. So it's a little softer here. Now, the one disagreement, though, is that the Euro weeklies are not that hot in the West. So that's been a bit of a debate point as well. But I found, with the summer base state, more often than not, we find opportunities for the it's really the PNA that we track, but it's really been shifting, retrograding west a lot to get that heat into the upper west, kind of away from those monsoon areas. So I felt like in general, the Euro weeklies were kind of the base date since July 1, and the CFS weeklies were the base date since June 1. So they're not too far, they're not too bad of forecasts there. And you imagine if you have a cooler south and a hotter north, depending on how much heat you get to Chicago and to New York, those population weighted cooling degree days will fluctuate based on that. If you get enough heat, I think in the CFS one here, if you get enough heat to Chicago and a little bit into the Northeast there, and as well as the West, you can have marginally above normal cooling degree days. Now, the European weeklies, I think, would be marginally below normal cooling degree days because you've got Chicago and New York really close to the 30-year, and you've got a large cool area in the south, so that would be a little cooler than normal. The summer base state, I'll show you in a minute what the cooling degree days. The summer base state has been hotter than normal, competing with the 10-year for the most part. These are the Euro Weekly clusters from last night's update, and just to give you an idea of what the spread is among the members, they had a lot of cool western cases there. There's only 24% that had a really strong PNA ridge look, a big ridge in western Canada there. This over the top look is something we've been seeing a lot this summer. There's been some really strong heat anomalies in Canada and less in the lower 48, and that's been affecting and causing trouble with our CDD forecast, I guess. And then and at times we have had the ridge back up and retrograde to the west coast for that positive PNA spike and a cool surprise like that first week of August, for example. That was a much cooler period there. I kind of like this 45% the best. Except I think they're too cool in the west. We've seen what I've been calling the drought magnet this summer, where the heat tends to expand further west than the models expected to. Seattle and Portland have had quite a few heat events, and they tend to kind of sneak in on the models. So I would say maybe a blend of this one and a weaker version of this one here on the right might be the better idea, just suppressing that cooling to the south a bit more. But here's the summer to date. If you do June 1 to August 16th, I see that I messed up my PowerPoint. I apologize. So for June 1 to August 16th yesterday, we're actually right here, this red column, which is +4 cooling degree days over the 10-year normal of 821. Now, if you do July 1st to August 16th more recently, then you're right in the middle of the 2000s here, and 2021's right in the middle. These are, like I say, all the 2000s, so it's it's not too cool and not too hot. It's not been too crazy, I guess, in the second half of the summer of the meteorological summer here. When I look at this picture from the Euro Ensemble from last night, I'm not too excited about heat in the lower 48. You see a lot of warm to hot height anomalies over Canada, more so instead of the US. You've got a bit of a ridge axis over the northern Rockies and northern plains. You've got diffluence aloft over the eastern U.S., which tends to, the diverging heights here into the Midwest there tends to suggest or signal moisture, precipitation, rising motion. You've got some slight area of cooler than normal heights over the eastern U.S. as well. So I'm not too excited looking at the way the European models leading into September. The Canadian American are similar as well, with more of a these changes to slightly higher P&A issues, and you can see it's unclear with the bouncing on the various model runs, but there's been an upward trend in the P&A again as you head toward the end of August into the start of September. So I'm a little concerned about this troughing, and these are the 24-hour changes on the Euro Ensemble for the 11 to 15 day, and they see the height falls there. Some height falls over the Gulf of Alaska too, so you have a narrow ridge structure there. So it's a little complex. It's not straightforward. I did look at day 15 upper level pattern matches, the 500 millibar pattern matches, the top 10 dates that correspond to the pattern that each model is showing for the American, European, and Canadian. And what I did was I looked at common dates on all three of them. And it was really interesting. 2016, 2010, 2006 are included, 2 years from the 1990s and 1968. When I created the early September pattern from those dates, I get a really cool pattern over the US. And I even excluded 1968, which was much cooler as well. The one interesting thing I thought, what I found there, was that the two cases in the 90s, 94 and 97, actually had a little closer to the summer base date that I showed earlier, with heat in the northern Rockies and northern plains, and then kind of softer east and south, although it just wasn't as hot in the west as what we've been getting this year. So it was kind of interesting to me that these snapshots, it's always dangerous to use snapshots, but the snapshots from day 15 were kind of giving me a cooler lean for early September for the first half. This is our 16 to 30 day that we do in-house, and this is our update this morning. My colleague Joe Woznicki put this together, and it does have a lot of flavors of the summer base state. I would be worried about maybe being a little hotter out in the upper west here. But the idea of going up and over the top into central and eastern Canada is something we've seen a lot this summer, and I think that's a very reasonable interpretation, particularly when you have all that blocking up there. You've had so much ridging up around Canada, the North Atlantic, the North Pacific, so it seems to be fueling more heat across the northern tier versus the southern tier, keeping that weakness below the ridging and kind of a seasonal cool look across Texas and the southeast. So I played around with a few different teleconnections and indices just for entertainment purposes, I guess, but also to maybe give us some guidance for the early part of September for our 16 to 20. And it was really interesting. The global wind has been negative. That's usually a hot signal in summer. That means that it's reflective of a La Nina base state. And that usually means that heat ridges are more stable, more durable. You tend to see more coverage over the mid latitudes of heat ridges. So August is verifying hotter than normal nationally, and we're definitely in that negative glam environment. But the models are showing a positive slope into the final week of August. If you were to extrapolate that into the 16 to 20 day, you would say it's probably between 0 and minus zero point 0.5, this range up here where I circled. So I did September 1 to 5 for 0 to minus zero point 0.5 global wind, and actually got a cooler signal for early September. You have to be a little lower, 0.5 to 1.5, even below 1.5, to get some of the hotter signals that you tend to get with the La Nina base state in early September. So I actually was surprised. This actually isn't too far off the mark from this map here, the September 1 through 15 I did on the just pattern matching the 500 millibars on day 15. So I was kind of surprised to get a similar answer here. I did want to layer a little bit more onto this, though, because we know the global wind will probably still be somewhat negative, and I said weakly negative by early September. And the other thing that's been really frequent this summer has been the positive Asian Bearing North American Index, the ABNA. It's been persistently positive a lot of times, and that's been pushing the heat up into the Midwest and plains more often than not. When I mix that just weaker negative global wind with the positive ABNA, I actually get a little bit of a hotter forecast now. I get heat in the northern plains down into the southern U.S. and a little bit cooler on the edges, though, northwest and northeast. This might be a little bit more realistic. And I was also interested to see that the cases that came up were mostly from the 2000s. So I'm not getting any sort of, not as much anyway, of a climate bias out of that. I also want to look at the Madden-Julian oscillation. It's been a bit of a mess lately. I'll show in the next slide, but the 15-day models are diverging and making it more of a difficult component to use. But the European weeklies, I had to go and count my dots, and the dates come on Storm Vista. But it's not it's a rollover on Storm Vista, but I can't show you here. But basically, September 1 through 5 was over here, very weak phase 3, and then for the CFS weeklies, they were in phase 5, below the 1 intensity, which I have always called this area the circle of death, but we recently had a webinar, and apparently now it's called the circle of unity. So I have to be, that's the new phrase apparently I'm supposed to use for that. So circle of unity is still a big challenge. So what I did was I looked at September 1 through 5 only for weak phase 3, all below +1 intensity. So weak phase 3, 4, and 5. It was really interesting. The European weeklies positioning over here, a little closer to phase 3, which is the Indian Ocean, gave me more of a hotter response across the US for the first 5 days of September. But phases 4 and 5 are cooler responses. And I actually see that in the 11 to 15 day right now, too, where the American ensemble is actually the hottest model, but it has the coolest MJO, and vice versa for the European. So it's really, unfortunately, very complicated right now. It's very difficult to work with. So my feeling on this is it's pretty noisy. And you could see this here as well, where the American models are really rushing over to phase 5. The Europeans actually getting stuck 2 and 1 a little bit. If you look at your neat tool on the Rutgers on Dave's page there, we're in phase 2 right now. Pretty good agreement. You project it out to the 16-20 day. It does suggest a hotter signal as of August 1st. Since we're right in the middle of August, I want to look at September 1st as well. And I got no signal there from that. So, but there was a little bit of a hotter signal there. In my forecast, what I put into the contest this morning was basically the numbers that we have with the new normals and everything. We have the 30-year normal at 43 pop weight at cooling degree days, and the 10-year at 47. So I just went right in the middle at 45. I feel like trying to time out the undulations of the PNA spikes are very difficult to try to corner an early August cool period like that. But getting that heat up and over into the Midwest and East at times is sufficient to get you slightly hotter than a 30-year, but it's been struggling to get above a 10-year at times with the cooler south issues. And I think the cooler south issue becomes a bigger issue as we go into September, because their normals are a lot hotter in the south at that point. You start to see a bigger divide showing up there. So that's what I went with a middle ground approach today, and right in between the 10 and 30-year normal. I also looked at the global wind oscillation just to get an idea as well. And the models are all pretty much in GWO phase 4 by day 15. And it looks like it'll still be in phase 4 starting on day 16, at least the first half of the 16 to 20 day, based on if you were just to extrapolate from that. I was fascinated to find that September 1 through 5 for GWO phase 4, global wind oscillation phase 4, looks like this map here, which is the summer base state, which is hot in the west, northern Rockies, north central US, and kind of mixed in the east and south. And so very similar to my July 1st to August 16th map I showed earlier in the presentation. So again, it doesn't give me a good feeling that we're going to go super hot nationally, so I didn't want to go way above a 10-year. But it also wasn't super cool either. You're getting some heat into the Midwest. You got some decent heat in the West. So I didn't want to go too far south of a 30-year normal either. So I just kind of stuck in the middle ground approach with my forecast thinking. But I was impressed with that GWO similarity there. So that's kind of my walkthrough of the 16 to 20 day. It's definitely a challenge right now. I like the summer base state. It's been a very recurrent theme, but there have been moments like early August. There was a moment just last week when we had that big heat in the East Coast with the mid to upper 90s, when it flies to the tails of the distribution of how the summer's been verifying. So trying to nail a 5-day window and get one of those events is very difficult. And so I think the safest route is probably to refer to the base date of the summer, and as a forecast that far out at this point. Any questions? challenging stuff as we start to move it. I've been mixed about September. Whether we're going to stay in the summer base state or something new is going to unfold here. That's been an interesting challenge there.
Hey Matt, this is Dave.
Yeah.
Just to and thanks for the briefing. Appreciate that. We obviously mentioned, I think before the recording started, that the tropics are unusually quiet, and in
Hmm.
particular the West Pack is unusually quiet. So sometimes there's a reliable signal in the tropics, but we're just not seeing that this year.
Mm-mm.
Any comments on? I mean, we obviously would expect an uptick at some point, but we're just not seeing anything really materialize in mass.
Yeah, it's true. And and that first week of August cool down was preceded by like three or four named storms at the same time in the West Pacific. Remember that they were like, and at least three of the four, I think, curved north, into Japan just after the Olympics ended. And we had this curve up into the North Pacific. And I think that may have influenced that PNA spike that occurred. I did notice that the models are picking up activity in the West Pack at the very end of August here. I don't know if that'll affect the very front door of September, but it may play a role, in the second week of September or so, and something to watch. But you're right. I mean, it's really kind of settled down out there, and we're not getting really any big super typhoons either. We're just getting kind of weaker systems.
Right.
I didn't think that thing at the end of July was going to do anything, but I guess because there was three or four of them, maybe it did.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
Maybe the some contribution of
I
them.
know, I know.
The interesting thing about the Bay State this summer, we've kind of talked about this in some of the briefings in the last month, is that although the Bay State has been persistent, I mean, the volatility this summer feels a lot higher than what we've experienced the last few summers.
I agree.
The cool drawdowns have been significant, but that hasn't mitigated the fact that these 4 and 5 day heat spikes have also been quite significant.
That's very true. Yep. And I think it's made the 16 and 20 day a lot more difficult this
For
year
sure.
versus
For
other
sure.
summers. Yeah.
So I guess it's probably a little surprising that I think volatility is not something we've experienced or we haven't felt like we've experienced it in summer recently. And maybe that's why this summer feels not only is the actual pattern challenging, but we have no recency to suggest that this might have been the case.
Yeah, no, it's true. And that's made it even more difficult. It's kind of like Um, I've always with the winters, La Nina winters tend to be more variable. You tend to see a lot more swings in either direction, and it gets more aggressive with the volatility. But you don't tend to see them as often in the summertime. So it is kind of interesting that we're getting that this summer, which is more more like what you would get in a La Nina winter, where we would do get a lot of bouncing back and forth. And even the global wind, which is a reflective of the La Nina based state, has had its moments where it's been positive a few times, and there's been some ups and downs on that intensity as well. So it's been a challenge this year for sure.
Hey Matt, do you think this look here we're seeing out at the end of the 11-15 day, where this kind of ridging kind of phase to the north, and we see quite a bit of ridging across kind of central North Canada, Greenland, even in kind of a pseudo-ish and negative NAO kind of appearance. Any thought on, if people could start to make some conjecture? Maybe it seems obviously premature to do that, but towards, obviously we'll be going into the tail end of CDD season here, and honestly
Yeah.
just a few weeks, but any kind of maybe a hint of maybe an early start to a colder look. Obviously that can change a lot. Obviously, the tropics will play around a huge role in that as well. But have you guys looked at any of the kind of these like pseudo-ish NAO looks late summer?
I haven't looked at it from an NAO standpoint alone, but I agree that we're in a second year La Nina. I call it a second year La Nina because last year was developing into the first year La Nina that we had last winter. So this is like the second summer of kind of a La Nina-ish part of the cycle. And I always those tend to be weaker summers. There's like 2008 as an example, 2017 as an example, where you had a second year of a La Nina cycle, and it's just never quite as hot as the first year with the developing La Nina. And what I found was there was a lot of those cases tended to have some colder risk as you go into Q4, and particularly toward December, I found, but sometimes November as well. But I think it's too early to make too much of an assessment at this point. Certainly, the negative NAO does make me wonder about the whole 2008, 2009 frame, and stuff like that. It makes me wonder about that type of winter. But it's probably too early to put too much into that. What we're thinking right now is kind of keeping it more toward uh, a traditional weak La Nina start, to which is a colder start and a warmer finish to the winter and the heating season. But it's kind of a mixed Q4 where you might get a warm November and a cold December, kind of mix out of that as well. But it'll be interesting to watch. I was doing some work looking at some uh, uh, divergent camps, I guess, when you're looking at second La Nina winters. There are cases like 2011 is the first one that always comes to mind, which was a second year La Nina that was just super, super warm that winter. It was a really big surprise how warm it was. And there was one other year in there too, it escapes me at the moment, but there was another year I was looking at as well that, and they had different types of pattern evolutions in the fall. So it will be helpful to look at that. For example, in 2011, you had a Gulf of Alaska low that was very dominant through the fall period. You had a very cold water base there in the Northeast Pacific and everything. So it was something that happened also to me in 2001 as well, and that was actually a third year of a La Nina cycle. But you had really chilly waters in the Northeast Pacific, and it was a chicken egg argument because you're just getting lots of GOA lows all the time. A
Sure. And with
very
those were
positive view.
and those were
Yeah.
seasons too, both those winters that we just never allowed kind of mid-continent cooling to form in
No. Uh-uh.
any kind of significance at any point during the winter, as I
Yeah.
recall, right?
No. Yeah. They were brutal. Yeah.
Right.
There was.
The hallmark of these kind of like second year La Ninas is kind of a pocket or a patch of mid-continent cold air. And that's
Mm-hmm.
obviously it's relocated more Canada versus the U.S., but those winters just never allowed
No.
that pocket
Yeah.
of cold to form, right?
Yep. Yep. So I had to be really cognizant of that. And then I want to say there was one year. There's another year I had in my batch that I was looking at that had trouble like that too. Not just '01 and 11, but there was another one as well that I just wanted to keep an eye on. I guess. Yeah, I was thinking of the IOD stuff that got us in trouble 2 winters ago too, but yeah, you're right about it is interesting that we're seeing so much blocking. I mean, we're getting on the EPO side, and we had a really strong tropospheric polar vortex this summer. Earlier, we had a very positive AO, and now it's become really, really negative. So it's just a lot of things have kind of shifted at the Arctic latitudes that we'll have to watch as well as we go into the fall here.
Now, honestly, too, Matt, I guess some commentary about this La Nina look in the Pacific. It is
Mm-hmm.
not as significant of a cold pool,
Mm-mm.
both subsurface and surface wise, than we were seeing last year at this time, right? Like we were
Correct.
developing
Yep.
into what was a borderline moderate to strong La Nina, obviously not in August, but it became that. But the
Mm-hmm.
subsurface indicators right now are not that we're heading in that kind of towards that kind of magnitude event, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so it's kind of a neutral negative. We're seeing kind of a neutral negative right now, and it looks like we'll go into weak, maybe October, based on the CFS, and so maybe just a weak La Nina this winter, which can be a little bit more constructive for cold air in the winter versus a moderate to strong La Nina. The other interesting thing, like you were mentioning there about the SSTs and everything, is that the eastern tropical Pacific is very different from last year. I was looking at that on yesterday, and the most recent week from NOAA last year had the Nino 1-2 area. I think it was minus zero point 0.9 Celsius, and this past week was plus zero point 0.1. So it's 1 degree Celsius warmer than last year, and I think that's making a big difference on the eastern tropical Pacific being warm tends to create more wind shear in the Atlantic, and I think that's keeping the Atlantic storms weaker this year as well. So it's playing a different role than last year. You got a complete opposite look. Now, I, I had a client ask me about this, Dave, and I don't know if you know. Do they call it a Madoki La Nina, or is that
That's interesting. I've never heard that term actually, to be honest with you.
I hadn't either, and they asked me, well, since it's a Madoki La Nina instead of a regular La Nina, how is that going to change your forecast? And the same Sorry about that. It's the same person also accidentally called a Molokai La Nina, which I don't know, but I really got confused at that
Hey,
point.
now
But
we're just making up words.
I know, it's an island in Hawaii.
No,
Um,
I've not heard. That's actually new to me. I've never run
yeah,
across that.
yeah, that
We've
was.
both been in this business a long time. I know
Yes, we
that's a new
have.
one.
I know. It's yep, it's always something new, that's for sure to ponder. But yeah, but you're right, it's a different look to this La Nina than last year. So it's not easy just to say it's going to be a repeat of last year, and certainly the summer's been a lot different than last year too. Like you said, a lot more volatile. So that'll be interesting. If you carry that sort of higher standard deviation into the winter, we'll be talking like 95, 96 type craziness where, every other week is a different pattern.
Oh boy, that was yeah,
Yep.
great memories of that one.
I
That
know, yeah.
that tremendous volatility.
Yep. Yep. Markets like the volatility, that's for
They
sure.
sure do, right? It
Yeah.
really creates a lot of it really
Uh,
creates a lot of opportunity, and
yep.
obviously opportunity to fail as well. But the
Yes.
yeah, winter like that would really be obviously welcome, where you just alternate week to week between
Yeah. Yeah.
significant cold and then obviously significant warm outbreaks. And then that's in some ways has made some of the summer more fun than the last few summers. The last few summers, that has this kind of
Hmm.
impression, and it's true that we've had this kind of grinding warmth to
Yep.
borderline heat, nothing extreme, but and obviously was marked off in the last 4 or 5 years by excessive low temperatures, not extreme heat during the day.
Hmm.
So this summer, in a way, has been kind of welcome, even though the base state has been kind of fixed. The challenges in these 5 day windows, not
Oh
even just the
yeah.
16 to 20, but the 6 to 10 and the 11 to 15 day have been I mean, fun maybe not be the right word, but yeah, it's been a little bit of a challenge, and has created opportunities in the markets for sure.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen that with the 6 to 10 day has not looked like the 11 to 15 days. So the models don't see something until you get a little closer in. And a few times
Right.
that's happened. Yeah, it has, and in both directions too. We've had big hotter surprises and big colder surprises. So it's been a little bit of both. So yeah, it's interesting.
That's reflected in our performance metrics.
I bet.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at like the directional hit rate and things like that, as compared to previous summers, it's yeah, it's much lower. A lot of folks are bouncing around 50% in terms of directional hit rate versus the 30-year normal,
Mm,
versus previous years that we've done this, and generally in the summer, as compared to the 30-year, the directional hit rates have been like 60s, 70s, and some people maybe even in the 80s.
huh.
So it's
Wow.
yeah, it's definitely been challenging, which made me think too, like if we can predict um the if we can predict not just like, yeah, the temperature outlook or precipitation, but the predictability, like
Yeah. Yeah.
knowing in advance that this summer was going to be more challenging. And I guess maybe that is linked, maybe it's directly correlated to the volatility that you guys were just talking about, the fact that this has, and I'm saying this more subjectively, but yeah, it seems right, that the summer was bouncing around, temperatures bouncing around, in terms of how it actually was observed, more than recent years where, like Dave said, it's more of a grinding, kind of above normal and kind of staying above normal and above normal. I wonder, it would be interesting, that could also be something that even folks, like a couple of the folks on the line, Michael or Philip, could look at with some extra time, or any of us, but the relationship between summer or winter pattern volatility, maybe even just in the United States or globally, versus forecast performance. I don't know if anyone has thoughts on that.
Yeah, I've done research in the past on winters with this respect, where the standard deviation, daily standard deviation of degree days is higher in La Nina winters versus El Nino. And I've always thought that the reason why was because La Ninas try to do a lot more negative P&A and putting more troughs in the west, and that's not the natural state of the winter. If you look at the 30-year normals or whatever of the 500 millibar patterns, the natural state is to have a ridge in the west in the winter. So that pushing of those troughs into the west creates a lot of instability downstream, and there's always this fight back toward climatology. So I always felt like La Ninas had higher standard deviation, but the data kind of bears that out as well. But what I didn't see as much of was, I didn't see that as in the summers as much. But now I'm wondering if maybe second year summers are where that is, because we saw that in some of these other second year summers where there's been a lot more variability, like 2008, for example, which had a super hot June and then a cool August, and it just kind of like a lot of bouncing around back and forth in that summer as well.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Anyone else have any thoughts in terms of, or have looked at the relationship between pattern volatility and forecast performance? I guess the theory being that the greater the actual pattern volatility, I guess negatively correlated,
Yeah.
the worse the performance, i.e., the models have a difficult time when the pattern, when the pattern's bouncing around,
Hmm.
things like that. Anyone else have thoughts on that?
My only thoughts to that comes from personal experience. Usually, when the pattern is more variable, I seem to get a pretty big negative scores. So
Yeah.
that's I'll throw my hat into the agree pile on that one.
I guess I mean, in the way your contest is designed, I guess the best thing to do in this situation is to really broaden your risk range that you put out there, right? Your air bar range that you put on there, um, to soften the blows sometimes, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah,
Can't
yeah. It
can't
could
be too
be.
confident. Yeah.
It is, but it's like we've talked a lot in the contest about like even like the change from to July,
Mm.
and how that caused a lot of problems with skill scores and stuff. You had, and even arguably May, June, and then June to July. Dave and I have talked a lot about this. The fact that we had this June from a national standpoint that ended up being, I think, the warmest on record, or right up there.
Yep, it was.
Um,
Yeah. Hmm.
and for some of us, that caused some surprise by the
Hmm.
fact that we went into that with a very wet South, and hey, some limiting factor there in terms of keeping the heat down. Well, that didn't happen. But then, okay, so this summer can overwhelm those kinds of things, and going into July, bank on just continuation. And of course, we saw some big changes happen in July. And then like you guys mentioned, and then since then there's just been some volatility. This recent week was back hot again
Yeah.
in the east. So I think sometimes right, you can open up your 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 um your standard deviation and stuff, but I guess one of the tricky parts is you start to make certain assumptions about, well, okay, it's mid late June, we're hot, we're starting to get in deeper into the summer, so maybe I can actually tighten my confidence
Yeah.
band, and you would actually have gone in the wrong direction.
Yep, yep. Yeah, that would have, yep, that was a challenge for sure. You feel like you got a sense of the summer and it's showing you it's what it's going to do, and then it does something different.
And
Yeah.
Matt, I just had one other question, and I definitely want to see open it up to Philip and Michael who've joined. But you guys were talking just a little bit about the seasonal perspective. I think Dave was trying to get you to
Yeah.
reveal all the secrets about this winter. But have you noticed? I know in terms of the predictability for the winter. For let's just focus on winter, I guess.
Hmm.
Um, are there certain aspects of the forecast which you found, whether it's La Nina or El Nino, that are more dependable than not? And what I mean by that is, um, at the end of the day, of course, we want to know the 2 meter temperature forecast anomalies, and we want to know them for each month and stuff like that,
Hmm.
whereas the season as a whole. Um, but putting aside that predictability in terms of how hard that is or not, or how reliable that is or not, are there other things that can be more reliable, such as, okay, maybe in La Nina, the 2 meter temperature anomaly forecast can range between X and Y, but 90% of the time it's always colder early and warmer late. Or there's more extreme, like you were talking about volatility before. There's
Hmm.
we a high percentage of the time, regardless of the actual outlook or outcome in terms of anomaly, we do see greater volatility in X versus Y. Are there any of those other things, like those kinds of sort of secondary issues, if you will, or conditions that you found to be more reliable during some of these climate states?
Yeah, it depends on what the climate state is and where you're at on it. And so, yeah, sometimes it's more dependable and other times it's not. And it's just, one of the issues we run into is, like you're saying, in recent years, and we want to just use recent years, but when you do that, you restrict your sample size so much that you have the other argument that you're not using a large enough sample size to get a representative data set of what all could really happen. So it gets really tricky, to work with it. I've been trying my best to, kind of restrict myself to just looking at the 2000s for these things. And I was impressed. I just did a broad brush. I just looked at all negative INSO Decembers, for example, and in the 2000s. And there's a pretty strong majority to the cold side now. We've got 20 years of the 2000s now, and I think it was 8 of the 10 that were negative INSO were colder than the 30-year normal. It's a little easier now because the 30-year normal has changed on us. So the 30-year normal went warmer, so it's a little easier to qualify some of these things, I think. So maybe that's going to make our forecasting a little easier going forward. The funny thing is, last winter was technically a marginally warmer than normal winter until they changed the normals in May, and now it's a marginally colder than normal winter was last year. So it is funny how you're playing to you have to adjust to your new baseline. It makes it challenging as well.
Right.
But no, but to your point, I agree. There are some things that are easier and some things are more difficult. But the thing that gets me is what happened 2 winters ago, and it really got us pretty bad too. We didn't catch it, but the looking in retrospect, it was that record IOD intensity, Indian Ocean dipole, and it was only it's one of those small sample size cases like a super El Nino. We've only had now 3 super El Ninos since we were measuring super El Ninos, and they all have a very similar winter pattern. They're very consistent. If you're in a super El Nino, the odds are pretty good, but you've got a small sample size to work with. And the same thing with the IOD that was at that record that it was at. There were only 2 other cases to work with. Both of them matched the winter of 2 years ago, very, very warm winter of 2 years ago, but they again, you're working with a small sample size, so it gets really challenging, I think, and it's very dependent on whatever your base, whatever you're working with in terms of climate signals at the time.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Michael or Philip, do you guys have any particular questions, or you could also share your forecast if you'd like?
So I can just share my forecast real quick, and then
Sounds
at the
good.
end of that, I'll just mention what I haven't done any extensive research on September, but I'll just give my 2 cents on what I think September might end up being. So my forecast was for 46.1 CDDs, which seems to be right in about the middle of the pack as everyone else. Started off with my usual blend of the euro and the 10-year, which gave me a value of 43.58. Took a look at the teleconnections, and I also saw the increasingly negative NAO being the only real outlier from the summer so far. I didn't make any changes based on that, though, because it seems like we're kind of in a weird time for the NAO, from what I can tell, where we're kind of like in between, where it doesn't really do all that much influence on the pattern. So I kind of discounted it, but there is some risk there to the warmer side, I think. The other thing, took a look at the CPC forecast, and they're looking quite warm. Have a huge swath of the country going basically from West Coast all the way to the East Coast of above normal, stretching down from Central California through New Jersey, if you can imagine that line, with Chicago above normal, Philly, New York, Boston, all above normal, and the area of below normal still in the same spot it's been the whole summer, but it's starting to shrink a little bit, and it's kind of more confined to the very deep south rather than the south, and more of Texas is that warmth is starting to inch towards Texas. So reversal on what the CPC has been showing the past few weeks, at least from my perspective. So I increased my forecast by 2.5 CDDs based on that, getting me the final value of 46.1, and also lowered my spread a little bit, just because we've been pretty consistently between the 10 and 30-year normals. So trying to improve my score a little bit there. And as for September, this is purely anecdotal, but it seems that for the past 8 or 9 years or so, every single September, at least in New Jersey, has been obliteratingly hot. And I'm hoping I'm wrong, but I'm guessing that's what it's going to be again. Any
Very good. Yeah.
questions, Ron?
No, that's good. Thanks. So you're hotter for the 60 to 20 day. So that's just a little bit over me, a 45 for me. And you said you tightened your range. And I haven't been looking at the numbers or verifications or anything. So I mean, what would a tighter range look like? I mean, what did you have for that?
So I usually go with my range. I usually stick with the 30-year normal, which the range for that is 8.6 on the
Okay.
spread.
Mm-hmm.
I took it down to 7.2 this
Mm.
week. I think I did as well last week. Dr. Lupo is the one that kind of brought it to my attention that, we've been verifying pretty much between the 10 and the 30 year.
Yeah.
Maybe not this week because they're kind of close together, but within that range, and it's been pretty consistently in that range, except think the last verification wasn't in that range, ironically, but it's been so I've been lowering it the past I guess now 2 weeks to kind of account for that.
Well, that's good. Yeah, that makes sense. And usually the standard deviation is lower in the summer. You can get a little bit more confident, but like we were talking earlier, it's just been so much volatility. If you get that 1 5-day window with that cool push we had in the first week of August, or like the heat last week, it just blows you right out to one side or the other. It's been a challenge. I was just looking it up. September last year was actually cooler than normal for the U.S. Um, uh, it was hot in the west and cool Midwest, South, and East. It was unusual because, like you were saying, Michael, most of the Septembers in recent years have been really hot. The 10-year normal is way above the 30-year on our data set right now for September. Because of that, we've had so many hot Septembers in recent years. Last year, we were at 185 cooling degree days for the U.S. for our numbers versus a 30-year of 188. So we're just slightly below the 30-year. But before that, we were in the 250s, the 240s, low 200s back in 2017. So they were set in 230 in 2016, 234. Yeah, it's just 5 of the last 6 years have been excessively hot in New Jersey and the eastern U.S. So, yep.
That figures that the one nice September is the one September nobody can really go outside.
I know. Yeah, the pandemic September. Yep.
Figures.
Oh, good. That was very interesting. Thank you.
Philip, would you like to share?
Sure. I guess on my side, nothing too different in terms of the strategy from Mike. I have been sticking with my formula, and it's more the same this week. He already mentioned the CPC, so I won't go into detail about that. I did notice on the MJO signal that we are currently in about phase 2 with the tropical convection active, centered on Africa, but sort of stretching into the Atlantic and also the Western Indian Ocean. And the models seem to disagree as to whether the signal goes null or if it goes into phase 5 and 6. So I used the lag composites for phase 2 and also compared it to our MJO analog. And overall, I treated the tropics as a somewhat warm signal. And then as Mike also mentioned with the teleconnections, that NAO is sort of headed into negative. So I treated that also as a bit of a warm signal. And then I noted that the EC and the CFS are both fairly warm. CFS actually, the numbers still end up being below the 30-year, but it's one of the warmer numbers posted by the CFS, especially if you look at their 500 millibar pattern. So I again used my CFS +9 in my forecast, and putting everything together, I got a value of 42.7. I added a 0.5 fudge factor given warmer concerns based on the models and also what the CPC is suggesting. And overall, after that, I put a slightly larger spread, but essentially very close to the average spread. So 8.9 instead of 8.6.
Okay, yeah.
I also noted that, as he mentioned, that the last few Septembers have generally been very warm. I remember the 90s extending all the way into the end of September several times in the past few years. So
yes.
I would assume warm unless otherwise stated.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think I saw something along those lines where is it is it something where the Septembers are getting hotter and the Mays are getting cooler or something like that? It's almost like the summer
Feels like it.
shifting a little bit. Yeah, it's so funny. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, very good. Thanks. Yeah, so we're pretty much in the 40s range, everybody, at this point. Either Dave's do anything different? Anything way out of field there?
Yeah,
No. Oh, sorry, the other Dave.
I
Go
said
ahead.
plural. I don't know.
okay. No, I didn't do anything really remarkably different. There is one concern that we have, though, is that these late summer negative NAOs or kind of pseudo-ish negative NAOs, they can sometimes support, while they support a cool trough in the Northeast, you can actually see the emergence of a southern ridge. And we've had some seasons in the not too distant past that you've had some ridging that's occurred over Texas and parts of the Southeast. Now, I know those are areas that are very wet, so we've got some soil moisture headwinds there, but it wouldn't surprise me to kind of see these numbers verify, but we may see the morphology of it and kind of the how it looks geographically split, maybe break up a little bit here if we do get much more of a coherent negative NAO AO signal, in that you may sustain some more lakes to northeast ridging, or correction, opposite that, lakes to northeast trough in southern ridge. And maybe that southern ridge does connect with kind of the mean ridge, which is kind of over the western high plains and northern Rockies. But that is a small concern that we have this morning.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, like I say, we haven't had that much of the negative NAO part of it, this equation. So yeah, it might finally change something here.
Yeah, there's some years where some late summer, early fall negative NAOs can actually be quite hot, all the way up the East Coast. Now, I think you might need some support from the tropics to maybe get that, but it's kind of in the back of our mind as kind of a bit of a tail risk.
Yeah, it sounds reasonable. Or are you gonna say Dave there too? The other Dave?
Yeah, I don't have too much to add my forecast. I could probably subtract a lot, but in terms of value. But no, I was just I wonder if I could shift gears just for a second, because I know we don't have too much time. But back to the tropics, and you were talking about the tropics a little bit. I wonder if you could add anything else about I guess one of two things. Because I don't follow it as close as you guys. So where can you kind of give us an update in terms of where we are in terms of like overall like activity like ACE or something like that? Like are we near, above, a little bit below? And then I guess what's the perspective from the market too, like or even like like the full Klotzbachs and some of the groups out there? Is there a concern at this point that the season is going to underperform, I guess you could say, in terms of, in particular, hurricanes and major hurricane activity? And the final part to that, and I know you did start to talk about this a little bit, but do you think, in some of these other years, we do have these lulls, and then you can get into a really hyperactive period that, like, for 3 weeks, and all of a sudden you go from, you can make up a lot of ground. Is there anything there that, do you think that there's a window of opportunity still for something like that, maybe in the first half of September or something like that?
Yeah, there's definitely a possibility that we could get a hyper period coming up through. I noticed that I talked earlier about the Nino 1-2 being um, uh, different from last year, being a warm area versus a cool area, and that's been affecting, I think, the wind shear over the Atlantic basin being a lot more aggressive, and the models are suggesting that we might go back in the cooler direction for those waters by later in September and October. So, we could see maybe a surprise, more active period between September 15th and October 15th or something to play catch up at that point. But as of right now, I was trying to count when you asked that question. I want to say we're like 5 named storms behind last year at this point. At this time right now, last year, we were just about to start dealing with Hurricane Laura and Marco, and we just got Henri there, so we're at the H storm. But we had Isaias was like at the end of July and early August. So, and we're not even past the H storm yet this year. So we're 4 or 5 storms behind last year if you count all the activity like TD10 and everything that occurred last year too. And certainly in terms of hurricanes as well. It's just we were already at the I want to say we're at the third hurricane by this point last year, and right now we've only had one so far. So it's definitely been a quieter season in terms of how strong these storms can get. And so I don't know. The other Dave, I don't have the ACE numbers to see how far it is different from last year, but I know I'm pretty sure it's lower than last year given the storm count that we're at this point.
Yeah, I think we're pretty far behind. And obviously we've had shorter track storms than last year. To be fair, one thing I want to add to about the tropics that Matt mentioned, maybe a spate of activity later in September. Obviously, the season runs quite late, and we're really not even at the halfway point yet. And obviously we're running behind. But in terms of kind of try to get a little bit more specific, if you look at, we referenced this earlier. Matt mentioned it's no longer, now it's the circle of opportunity.
Unity.
one of the reasons why those Wheeler-Hendon forecasts go into that circle is that you're losing some of the cohesiveness with regards to just the coherency of the Kelvin waves of the tropics, and it looks like both the GFS ensembles and the European ensembles in the 11 to 15 days see kind of a piecemeal look across the tropics, where you've got some rising motion from a decaying Kelvin wave over the Indian Ocean, and potentially the reemergence of a wave over the Atlantic and West Africa. This would put us out. This is probably the last couple of days of April. I'm sorry, correction, August. That wrong month. The last couple of days of August. And if there's any skill to that whatsoever, after Henri, we'll go into another quiet, whatever, like 5, 6, 7 days. We may see a tick higher in activity. You get another spate of storms here at the, not maybe the end of the month, but looking into September. If you've got that kind of appearance, I'm looking at the 200 millibar velocity potential to kind of diagnose that. And it's worked only marginal this summer, and I think it may be due to what Matt identified earlier, which was this kind of like unfavorable headwind from Nino 1-2. But if we can get the kind of enhanced phase of that Kelvin wave over the Atlantic again early September, we'll be, I think, ripe to get another run of storms. But the hard thing has been we don't have, or haven't been able to get these long track storms. Everything's been kind of close in, felt like close in development, and the models have really struggled with that. Seeing that more than 5 days out.
Yeah, because of the nature of them. That makes a lot of sense. I think that would be something to look for here coming up. I had seen the American ensemble members. I was looking for any signs of life this morning, and I did see some development. You were mentioning the last few days of August, and that does seem reasonable. Like there was one set of members that were doing something around August 25th, so the middle of next week, right off the Central American coast and Western Caribbean, and lifting up to the Yucatan and Bay of Campeche. And there was another batch of members developing something around the 29th and 30th in that same area, moving up to the northwest as well. So kind of moving into the area where Grace is going to end up as well. And then the European ensemble members had a cluster of members showing a longer track system coming off the African coast that became a recurve story up going towards Bermuda or something like that, or out to sea. So I did see some activity percolating in the 11 to 15 day, the last 5 days of August, that could go along with your thinking there. It makes sense.
Right.
So, yeah.
Matt and I have had more than a few good late summer fall forecasts ruined by very active tropics 2 weeks out that we don't really foresee.
Just like recurving typhoons, they can really affect the jet stream pattern. So
You're great, thank you.
Big chaos maker there.
Any final thoughts for Matt before we let him go, or questions?
I think that's all I've got, but good luck to everybody on the forecast.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matt. And
yeah,
I can take my sunglasses off now.
I know, I'll turn my bright screen off. All right,
thanks, Matt.
Thank you all very much. Great talking to everybody. Have a good rest of your day.
All right, take care, guys.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.